What is at the heart of your calling? You feel this call to make the world a better place, but what is that all about? Where does that actually come from for you? And what we want to talk about today is actually getting to the roots of why it is that you feel this urge to make the world a better place. And by understanding how you are drawing on your own deepest roots, culturally, traditionally, religiously, spiritually, as well as what you know about policy and politics, how you bring all of that to the table in your calling is crucial to actually not only understanding yourself, but actually transcending yourself and helping bring together something bigger than yourself. This all sounds really metaphysical, but hopefully when we break this down, you'll get some a deeper view into actually what really is making you tick, and how by drawing on the best of that, your strengths, you can contribute to breaking across polarization, bringing people together, and actually tapping into far more power than you would ordinarily have. So what is this calling all about? Well, I guess the first thing to say is that, as Abraham Maslow and many other psychologists have noted, human beings are called to serve something larger than ourselves. And if you look back, through human history, you see this being expressed in different religious and philosophical traditions. There is just this common calling that we feel. But unfortunately, not all of us are actually able to clearly hear that calling or figure out how to respond to it. And that's actually one of the greatest sources of kind of being out of alignment or sort of deeper unhappiness. And in this community of joyful impact, whether the accelerator that we run for social entrepreneurs or the funders that we work with, many of you are already dialed in to a significant degree on what you want to focus on. But not everyone has thought as much about actually, what is that really about for me? Some of us have really clear stories about how we felt called. And others have just always sort of felt this sense, but we haven't really fully examined it. What we want to do today is dig into that a little bit to understand a little bit more where it's coming from and how it can really help us by understanding those roots, how we can do something even more powerful in this present moment. And that's really what this joyful impact journey is about. It's about understanding and actually integrating the different roots of your calling into something bigger than the sum of its parts. And it's really about service that honors yourself, so you really sort of understand and actualize yourself, but also goes beyond yourself. And again, that's what distinguishes what we're doing here from maybe traditional self-development, which kind of stops at the self-development piece and doesn't get in so much into transcending yourself and looking at the bigger whole that you are a part of. So let's talk first about the psychological roots of your calling, right? Abraham Maslow talks about this a lot. Tony Robbins and Chloe Medonis with their 6 human needs framework. This idea that we have higher level drives and we have innate human drives. Let's say that first. And some of them are what you might call lower level. Security, novelty, social status, social connection. Those are sort of egocentric drives. We all need to figure out how to meet those one way or another. But we also have these higher level drives for self-actualization. And not all of us figure out how to meet those. But if we can't figure out how to meet them, we can't really be fulfilled. We can't really feel the deepest sense of joy in our lives. And so we want to focus today on the psychological roots of our calling. How can I serve other people? Contributing to other people. We feel that deeply when we have that calling. How can I learn and grow and evolve myself? Right? That's a huge part of what pulls you forward to try to serve other people, is this challenge of growing yourself in order to do it. And then how can I actually transcend myself? How can I connect with something that's bigger than I am? And it starts sounding very metaphysical when we talk in this way. But many of us who have this calling have a sense that there really is something bigger than we are, whether we have sort of language of faith to describe that or something else. We have a sense that what we are called to do is not just to be the very best version of ourselves, but actually to help something bigger come true in the world. So your calling also has deep cultural roots. And this is where it's really helpful to think about the idea of worldviews. And a worldview is like a set of values and beliefs that every individual has. It's really a frame for how you understand the world around you. And it typically has both cultural and psychological roots. There are lots of ways to think about worldviews and to categorize them. If you go on the internet and Google worldview, you'll get a million different systems, 8 different worldviews, 9 different worldviews. I want to actually today just talk about 3, a framework for understanding this in terms of 3 worldviews. And there's an outfit called the Institute for Cultural Evolution. That's a mouthful. But they actually have an online assessment. I'll give you the link to that later on. And it really helps you situate yourself in the context of these 3 fundamental worldviews. And I don't want to suggest that these are exclusive. This is just one way of understanding how many human beings kind of look at the world in 3 different ways. And the first is traditional. So this would be a worldview that's shaped by religious faith and cultural tradition. I mean, it could be any religious faith, any cultural tradition, but one that is really grounded in that sort of traditional ideas that have been passed on for many generations. You could also distinguish that with a modern worldview. Think about the Enlightenment in the West, in Europe, or in other parts of the world where rational inquiry, scientific method, efficiency, and economic production become the watchword of the day. And, that modernist worldview is what you associated with technocrats, and it has brought us lots of things like the Green Revolution, a huge increase in the efficiency of food production. But of course, it has its downside. It's produced inequality, it's produced exploitation and oppression in a number of cases. And that brings in the third worldview, if you're going to think just about these 3, which is postmodern, which is really a critique of both traditional and modern worldviews, really coming from the perspective of advancing equity and wanting to address oppression on a systemic basis. And so if you think about where we are in the world right now, many of our biggest problems feel really stuck. And you can actually understand them being stuck as a conflict between these different worldviews. And when we try to solve complex problems, within a single perspective, we can often get stuck. And there's this famous quote from Albert Einstein: "We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them." So, just as an example, think about you pick any problem that really feels stuck, whether in the U.S. right now or in other countries around the world, whether it's global warming or education, poverty, really complex, what are called wicked problems, where they're so interconnected that it's really hard to conceive of one single solution. And then layer onto that different people are coming at these from different worldviews. You can see how we might get to this kind of hyper-polarization and partisanship where it just feels like we can't get, in a democracy, we can't get a majority of people to consistently agree on a solution, even if we knew that there was a specific solution. And of course, each worldview often says, hey, the solution we have is the right one, and let's pursue that. So how this relates to your calling is that in this community of joyful impact, social entrepreneurs and forward-thinking funders, people who have this vision to change the world, we actually really need to transcend that, transcend that kind of conflict, to understand that the path forward is very often about a deeper understanding, kind of getting up on the balcony and using systems thinking and other tools to actually integrate the benefits, the positive ideas and attributes from each of these worldviews when it comes to any single problem. And there's a book, Developmental Politics, by a guy named Steve McIntosh, that he's affiliated with this Institute for Cultural Evolution. It really advances this idea that many of the places we're stuck in our country right now, we can actually get unstuck if we take our thinking up a level as individuals and collectively. And again, why this or how this relates to your calling is that you guys are already doing that. And so many of you, who are in the trenches, in the arena, working as social entrepreneurs or as funders addressing complex challenges, you don't have the luxury of adhering rigidly to a single perspective. You're actually continually evaluating what's going on around you, listening deeply to other people, taking on board their ideas. And what comes from that is actually an integration of different ideas. So the movement for marriage equality is a really interesting example of a successful integration of multiple worldviews, if you will, to find a solution that actually now commands, 70, 80% support of the American public. And just 20 years ago, it was the opposite. Only 20, 30% of people supported ideas like that. So it is possible, by reframing and rethinking to transcend that kind of conflict. And, it's really helpful in this context to think about the elements of your own worldview. Where are you coming from? Where does your calling come from? Because for most of us, it actually has roots in all three of these worldviews, right? For myself, I'm a person of faith. I have always felt my calling has an element of, and this may sound, to those who don't share that faith, this may sound strange or like I'm thinking too much of myself, but I actually do feel called by God. The one time in my life when I actually heard God speaking to me was about ironically, letting go of my inhibitions in believing in my faith. And just saying, it was almost as if God was saying, don't worry about that. Don't worry about, whether this seems to conflict with other things. You can believe. And at the same time, show up as a full human being who believes in, a modern worldview about solving problems and a postmodern worldview about what's wrong with many of the systems we've created and the inequity and inequality that those systems are producing. The point of all this is that many of us who've been called to do this work of making the world a better place are already, without even thinking about it, integrating different traditions, different views of science and data and evidence, and a critique of all of that, and a real desire to see equity and systems change. These three worldviews don't have to be in conflict. We don't have to be stuck there, especially if we become more aware of it. So when you really begin to examine your own calling and ask, when did I know that I really needed to do this work of making the world a better place? When did I know that if I turned away from that, I just wouldn't feel satisfied, I wouldn't feel fulfilled? If you go back in your own life and think about that, you will get some clues as to where that's coming from for you. For some of you, it might be, really driven by policy, this idea that, hey, there is a better answer. It's almost like we've discovered penicillin in some field and we're not applying it. That would be a modern worldview. For some of you, it may be really grounded in a deep sense of trying to redress unfairness and inequity and to correct the flaws of the systems that have come before, and that as much as they may have produced certain benefits, they've had lots of downsides that you want to mitigate, that you want to change and address. So that might be coming from a postmodern perspective. The point is that you don't have to stick with any one of these, and by examining the roots, you can create strength and connection. And so this is like a little collage of some of the sources that have informed my worldview. And there's a lot in here. When you think about it, it's actually, if you were to go through all these titles and all these ideas, it is a real blend, and it's greater than the sum of its parts when you put it together and bring these ideas forward. Not just about how to make the world a better place, but also about how you as a human being can flourish to the greatest extent. So you're called to an elevated level of consciousness. That's what this journey of joyful impact is about. We talk about this a lot. It's about moving up this kind of spectrum of consciousness. And again, there's lots of thinkers out there, from Ken Wilber to Leahy and others who have this idea that there's a spectrum of consciousness. And we want to get up to this self-evolving and self-transcending level. That's what we talk about when we're talking about joyful impact, where what we're doing is powered by joy rather than fear, and we are aware of our own role in the larger systems around us. So that connects to these four commitments we have, the way we think about this in joyful impact. And I want to say also that Steve McIntosh, points out that one thing that we can bring people with different worldviews together around is this idea of progress and flourishing, that we want more of what we value, and that there is actually a lot more common ground in that than we might think when we get into specific issues where there's a polarized debate. And that by cultivating your own growth and encouraging others to do that, you can find those places where we actually come together and where our values are much more deeply aligned than we think. And so you could think about these commitments of joyful impact in the same way, that these are things that almost anyone, no matter where they're coming from, can aspire to these personal commitments, to get visionary, to prioritize visionary social impact above ego-driven needs, right? That's a universal virtue. Get real. Seek and speak the truth to everyone, including yourself. Again, there's real sort of virtue that almost all of us could ascribe to there. Get together. Treat others with consideration, not contempt. Again, many of us could agree around showing up in that way. And then getting better, committing to the daily pursuit of your own growth and joy and self-evolution. And so how this plays out in the world where I work the most with funders and social entrepreneurs, when funders bring their best selves, they're in this quadrant of sense-making giving, where they're having impact in their giving and they're feeling a level of satisfaction themselves. On the flip side, when donors are kind of pulled back and they are focused on, sometimes like they have a single worldview and they just want the world to work that way, whether it's, technocratic or traditional, or, there are not many funders like this, but kind of that postmodern critique. Any one of those approaches taken to an extreme is actually, you could view it as self-indulgent, as self-centered, because it's not actually taking in the world as it is. It's not appreciating other people's perspective. And so that gets us in a place where we don't want to be as a donor. And I know there's a lot on this particular page, but we use this tool a lot to understand how we get together with other people, how we live out that third commitment of joyful impact. And it really starts with actually listening to other people and being open to being persuaded yourself. I won't walk all the way through this graphic. We got another video that talks all about this. But the idea here is that when we get off base in how we're interacting with other people, we end up on the wrong ends of this spectrum, where we're actually, unfortunately, in some instances, people are using force, right, which is the opposite of what we want to do. But when we get locked in these conflicts, it escalates from a collaborative place to a coercive and even a forceful interaction. And so getting together, living out that commitment to treat others with consideration and not contempt, fundamentally starts with this perspective that you're integrating their point of view. You're starting even with their point of view rather than your own. You're not trying to pull people into your perspective. You're open to being pulled to theirs. And then, this connects also to something we talk about all the time, the 7 pillars of personal development. These are, you could think of them as personal virtues. You could think of them as habits or, daily practices that you develop. And actually, the planner page that we use actually encourages you to evaluate yourself in each one of these areas every day and strive to get better every day. So I hope that gives you some sense of, how your calling might be rooted in both your psychology and your worldview, and how you can draw on all the different elements of your worldview in particular to make something that is stronger than, and really a blend of what is most valuable and flourishing in each of those perspectives. So if you're interested in actually digging into this a little bit deeper, the Institute for Cultural Evolution has an online assessment that you can do, and it will actually tell you where you're at. And they have a 4th worldview, which is they call the integral worldview, which is really kind of what I've been talking about today, which is this idea that you can blend each of those other 3 in positive ways so that you can show up, and answer that call to the full degree with joy and impact. If you like this video and you want to access the worksheet or any other material that goes with it, just click the link below or head on over to joyfulimpact.co. That's the website where we have all the material we use for working with coaching and personal development for change agents. You can set up a free account in the members area, and you can also check out the blog where we have new content coming out all the time. Why are we putting all this out there for free? Because the world has never been more in need of a new greatest generation of change agents. I hope this material is helpful to you, and if it is, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. That will help us spread the word.